So, have you ever heard the term euphoric recall? And if not, are you curious about how euphoric recall may be affecting so many of your relationship dynamics and even affecting the different habits you have in multiple areas of life? Well, if you're interested, I'm going to tell you all about what this is and how it can dramatically affect our relationships and how we can also leverage this for good. So, I want to illustrate euphoric recall by first telling you a story of a client that I worked with about 9 years ago or so. And this client came and they sat down with me and they wanted to work on essentially healing the relationship to their ex-wife. And, they had been co-parenting and he was really trying to get this relationship back together. But when we looked, he told me all the different reasons why the relationship had fallen apart. And here's what I heard. He told me the story of how he had never drank growing up and how he was very, very successful up into his early 20s, mid 20s, got married, settled down, had children. And he never drank because his father was an alcoholic. And he decided, I never want to drink alcohol. I don't want to go through that. He didn't like some of the things he saw growing up. And sure enough, at around 28 years old, on a birthday, he said, you know what? I'm going to try drinking. You know what? My life's in a great place. Why not? And he said that the first experience he had with alcohol was something where he knew in that moment, this is going to be something he struggles with. He knew he felt like everything was sort of at peace in that first experience of feeling the alcohol set in. And he went on to dictate, some of the different stages of life to me. And he said, since that time, he became a severe alcoholic and he got 3 DUIs. The custody was taken away from his children. He lost his wife. And he said, I'm a good person and I mean well and I care so much and I want to put things back together. He lost multiple jobs. He lost a lot of money, and he said, but I can't even get there because this is what's coming up for me the most. It's like this fixation. It's so difficult for me to maintain a sense of sobriety. And what I want you to understand from this so far, because we're not going to talk about this in relationship to alcohol, we're going to talk about this in relationship to relationships. But his story was that in that initial experience of drinking alcohol, and this is how he described it to me, he said it was like all of the stress in my mind when I started feeling the alcohol set in, it dissipated. All of these concerns about tomorrow and the pressures and how to show up and all the things I have to do and me putting myself down, all of that was sort of absolved in that evening. And he felt like he came out of his shell and could be more social and got along with people and had different types of conversations and could be more vulnerable. And the way he described this to me was like all the things that were missing in my life, this sense of peace and this sense of confidence, those things emerged through drinking. And so he said, no matter how many painful things, and I think this is the most interesting part, and you'll see why in a moment, no matter how many painful things he endured after that, DUIs and jail time, constantly getting into, painful arguments with his wife, not seeing his kids for periods of time, no matter how many painful incidents he endured beyond then, he couldn't seem to kick the experience of drinking alcohol. And when we look at this illustrates euphoric recall and what euphoric recall essentially is. And you'll see this in terms of like the immense impact in so many areas of life. It's essentially this psychological concept where, an individual selectively remembers pleasurable memories in regards to a certain person or event or experience, and then downplays those negative aspects. You can think of it as seeing the world through like rose colored glasses or a person or an experience. But when we actually look at how we understand the subconscious mind to work, it makes so much sense because we get imprinted. Imagine this for a second. God forbid, but imagine that, Bob is driving his car and he gets in a car accident. He may have never felt unsafe in a car before, but after one specific experience, because the emotionality of it was so strong, he may try to get back in his car the next day and see his hands visibly shake, right? He may actually have this really, really painful experience. So that's not euphoric recall. But what I want you to see is that on either side, how we get imprinted by experiences is if there's extreme emotion around it. Think back to things you remember as a child. Think back to different memories you have that stand out to you. I mean, some of those standout memories as a child or in your life, they stand out to you because they are encoded with so much emotion. In fact, the more emotion we have in regards to specific experiences, the deeper it imprints the subconscious mind and the more easily it actually gets converted from short-term memory to long-term memory. And so the reason I'm telling you all of this is because I want you to understand that if we have this dynamic of having really positive imprints and associations, because the subconscious mind stores everything, right? So if you have these really positive emotional experiences, you may get so wired to see something so positively that it's almost like no matter how many negative things happen after that, we haven't rewired the associations. Now, here's another interesting component of this is that when somebody has a hangover or when somebody has these painful experiences take place, the time horizon confuses the subconscious mind. So just on a side note, like if somebody drinks alcohol, feels good, fairly immediately from drinking, feels bad the next day about what they did the night before, your subconscious doesn't associate your hangover the next day or the silly or upsetting things that you did, the fight you got into with somebody. It doesn't associate that with the alcohol because you're not drinking alcohol at the time. The time horizon is different. And the subconscious mind is an association making machine. So it actually has these more immediate associations, right? So the alcohol being associated with all these good things happened that evening at that time, the hangovers the next day. And this shifts how we get programmed. So the reason I'm telling you all of this is because this plays a massive role on our relationships. Now, going back to the alcohol part, I think, without going too far down the rabbit hole or off topic, you know, we can also change our associations to things by using principles for how we reprogram our subconscious mind. If you actually want to do a deep dive into subconscious reprogramming, I have a course called 21 Tools to Reprogram Your Subconscious Mind. You can pick the tools that you like the most. You can apply them to any area of your life. You can check it out for free, and I'll put that down below. But let's go into the how it impacts relationships part. So this is what happens is sometimes when we are in an experience with somebody where they love bomb early on, we can absolutely be at the mercy of euphoric recall because in those early stages of dating and relationships, we can tie so many positive emotional associations to somebody that that's our initial programming about the person. That's how we literally see and feel with that person. And because we have this idea or concept of how that person is, we actually have to do a lot of work to move beyond that if we no longer want to be in a relationship. And if you've ever had the experience where you're in a dynamic where you've seen somebody really positively who turned out to be more toxic or unhealthy in a relationship later on, like let's say they had some really, really unhealthy and damaging patterns, like a narcissist, for example, let's say you see this dynamic. Well, if you initially get programmed in this way, okay, then you have to essentially, go through and reprogram your associations about that person to be sort of woken up from this concept or vision or image of that person in order to be able to exit a relationship. And I'm sure you've seen this either in your personal life or in people's lives who you love or know, where it's a dynamic of actually feeling like, I know that I should leave. My conscious mind knows that I should leave, is what that is. But I keep going back. That's my subconscious mind is caught in euphoric recall, right? And this may not just be in that kind of relationship dynamic. But what we have to be able to do is understand that our conscious mind can reprogram our subconscious mind. So, what we can do, for example, is we can make new emotional associations. Now, sometimes it's hard, and you can see this in the context of abusive relationships, right? You can see that sometimes, unfortunately, if somebody's trapped in an abusive relationship and they're having that sort of phenomenon of I know I should leave, I know I should get out, but I keep going back. Sometimes the way that that person will eventually leave the relationship is that the experience will be so painful or so dramatic. Like there's a near sort of, a very scary, very abusive experience that can really frighten them. And in that case in particular, you may see the individual, like if they're really harmed by somebody, kind of wake up out of this space because what's actually happened is like the car accident example that I mentioned earlier. they get imprinted in the opposite direction because the emotionality is so strong and so extreme that it can actually force somebody to kind of wake up. But we don't want to leave relationships at that point. We don't want to leave relationships because we have such a big scare event that we're worried for our lives and for our future. And so it's really important that when we talk about this concept or idea, we also realize that there's another way to break the spell of euphoric recall without actually being in a position where we have to have a really, really painful event on the other side. Now, here's why. Your subconscious gets programmed the most and imprinted the most deeply through emotion, but it also gets reprogrammed through repetition. So if we are lacking on the emotion side, we can up the ante on the repetition side. So I'll give you an example here. And I used to do this with clients fairly frequently. Let's say I had a client who was coming in saying, Thais, I'm in a really bad relationship. I keep going back. I've been on and off, in and out of it for 4 years. Nothing's changing. In fact, it's getting worse. I'm having these big red flags, but I just can't seem to leave. I would get this client to actually write out all of the costs of staying with this person and feel about it over and over and over again across around a 21-day span, because research shows it takes about 21 days to rewire neural pathways if we don't have a ton of emotion behind it. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to reprogram the emotional associations about the thing that we are euphorically recalling. Okay. So, what this means is we actually are going to leverage repetition and emotion to see the cost of something we know is unhealthy to us. And yet we keep going back to, because that euphoric recall is actually like coloring our perception. And if we can look at the cost of being with this person or, seeing relationships in this way, especially when we know the relationship is over, it's time to leave, or it's unhealthy, or it's abusive in some form. Like, we need to be actually reprogramming our subconscious mind's associations about it in order to break free. Now, I will say this is a very, very effective habit if people stuck to it. It really helped people be ready to leave things that were not serving them. And also, we can apply this to many different aspects of life. We can apply this to bad habits that we have, painful habits that we have, old strategies around things, because our subconscious mind essentially, and at the end of the day, is wired to seek pleasure and to avoid pain. And so we can leverage understanding how these emotional associations work, so that through understanding this, if we want to create new habits, we can try to program them with a lot of positive emotion, seeing all the benefits of the habits, leveraging that through repetition and emotion over and over again until we're programmed to want to take action around those things. And by the same token, if there's things we want to break free from, we can start, coming up with all the different costs of going back to the same habit, the same person, the same experience, and leverage a lot of repetition and emotion around that to break free on that side of things. So, if you want to do a much deeper dive into the subconscious, again, you can check out that course for free for 7 days, all about reprogramming your subconscious mind with a whole bunch of different tools. This tool is in there as one of them. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have more questions about this or comments, please let me know down below. If there's videos you want to see, I would love to hear from you. Let me know your topics that you want to see on this channel more often. And if you are enjoying this channel, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing. I would super appreciate it. And thank you so much for stopping by.